One of the reporters for that story, Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. Peter is also an MSNBC political analyst. I don't even know where to start. This is the best article I've read in the longest time. It was so compelling. It's everywhere, and you made me wait all day. So let's go. What do you see as the biggest takeaway from this?
Well, I think what you really see here is a president who is, in fact, redefining what it means to be president. All the expectations, all the norms, all the sort of ways we've seen his predecessors treat the office, he has come in and thrown them out the window. It's a function of his own sort of sense of his battle for legitimacy. He sees the investigation. He sees the media. He sees the political structure all out to get him. His view is he's out there preserving this victory he won last year against a series of challenges and unfair attacks, and it's from the moment he wakes up in the morning till when he goes to bed at night. It is an hour by hour battle for his legitimacy and for the preservation of his presidency.
Before I get to more details, Peter, how difficult was it to get people to talk to you, or what was the tenor of it? Were people easily willing to talk to you, and if so, why?
Well, it depends on the person, of course. Obviously, some people close to him see the most, but are most reluctant to share at times. Sometimes you have to go back to people again and again to sort of draw out more from them. You learn something from somebody further out in the circle, and you go back towards somebody closer and say, "Well, hey, we heard about this. Is this true?" They might say, "Yes, you're right," or "No, you've got it a little bit off, and here's the right way to look at it." So most people who are talking to us, I think, have his best interests at heart. They actually, most people we talk to on the inside clearly share his political philosophy, or at least his political goals. But we also talk to people who don't share them, Democrats on the Hill, Republicans on the Hill, who've seen him up close, seen him in meetings and actions, and come away at times very disturbed by what they've seen.
Okay, so let's get back to this hour-by-hour battle for self-preservation, because part of the piece looks at how the president views himself, and it reads, quote, "He sees the highest office in the land, much as he did the night of his stunning victory over Hillary Clinton, as a prize he must fight to protect every waking moment, and Twitter is his Excalibur. Despite all his bluster, he views himself less as a titan dominating the world stage than a maligned outsider engaged in a struggle to be taken seriously." How does that perception play out in his daily habits?
Well, in the sense that he is constantly monitoring television, looking for things that people are saying about him. He watches television to see what people say about him, and then he goes on television, or he goes on Twitter, or he goes out to the lawn right in front of the helicopters to react to what he has seen on television. He watches, we hear, as much as 4 hours a day, sometimes much more than that, sometimes the volume up, sometimes the volume down. Even during meetings in the little dining room off the Oval Office, he might keep the TV on, just watching the scrolling headlines, the chyrons underneath, even if he's not got the volume up. It comes to dominate his day, and it comes to dominate the way he reacts to the world. It's a series of fights and battles. One former aide told us, if he has 2 or 3 days of kind of peaceful time, he kind of gets agitated about it. He doesn't like that. It makes him feel sort of off kilter. So he enjoys the fighting. He enjoys the battling. It is central to his political identity. It's central to his personal identity.
Well, and speaking of dominating, I mean, that screen of that TV, 60 inches? I mean, that's going to dominate that room. That's pretty big. Can't miss it.
That's pretty big.
Okay. Twitter. We all want to know about this, and the portion of the article is most interesting here when it talks about the habit, and you say occasionally the president solicits affirmation before hitting the tweet button. In June, according to a longtime advisor, he excitedly called friends to say he had the perfect tweet to neutralize the Russia investigation. He would call it a witch hunt. They were unimpressed. So, Peter, that seems to suggest he really does spend some time thinking about what he wants to tweet, that it's not always spontaneous.
Well, he does think about it in the sense that it's not like, somebody is forcing him to do this, or it's not. There's impulse here. It is, in fact, reactive at times to what he has seen on Fox and Friends, for instance, to see maybe he's watched Morning Joe, let's say, and gotten himself worked up, or see something on CNN. But he does, in fact, sometimes check it out first with aides or with lawyers in particular. We do see that there is some discipline to it, as much as he's gone after all manner of targets, his lawyers have seemed to convince him for the moment not to personally go after Robert Mueller, for instance, the special counsel investigating the Russia interference. He does say it's a witch hunt. He does go after the FBI and the Justice Department. He does say he's been unfairly accused of collusion when it's not true, but he has resisted the urge to go after the special counsel himself because his lawyers have told him, look, that's counterproductive. You're going to make things worse for yourself. So he does, in fact, have limits that he has drawn on how far he's willing to go.
But in regard to the Russia interview, it's also said that his friends, the article says that his friends have noticed a bit of a change within him regarding this, that he is starting to see this more as a serious threat.
He is seeing it as a threat, and he's increasingly worried about its impact on his friends and even members of his family. He does recognize now the toll this is taking on people even beyond himself. I think he's still fond of Michael Flynn, who just pleaded guilty to a charge of lying to investigators. He's very worried about, I think, what it would mean to his son, his son-in-law, his current staff, who've all been interviewed, or at least most of whom have been interviewed at this point. We don't know whether they face, legal jeopardy, but nobody knows at this point. And even he obviously is left wondering where this investigation is going to lead.
So an issue in the article that came up in almost every single interview was the president's ability to differentiate between bad information and things that are true. Explain that. What did you learn?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, we saw that with these anti-Muslim videos he tweeted out a week or two ago. He just simply saw them on Twitter, went ahead and sent them on out without having verified them, without having asked anybody what they really were showing or purporting to tell his followers what he meant by tweeting them out. And, you have John Kelly, the chief of staff, in there since this summer, trying very hard to sort of control the information to him, make sure he understands who is calling him, who he's talking with on the phone. If he doesn't happen to listen in on the call himself, John Kelly or one of his aides will try to go back to the person the president has talked to hear what it is that he was told. The articles from the newspapers and so forth are supposed to be vetted by, the staff secretary before they get to him, so he's not just reading anything off the internet that might be sort of conspiratorial or kind of off kilter. And he's kind of chafed at those restraints. And in fact, when he was down in Mar-a-Lago for Thanksgiving, friends were kind of slipping him news articles that otherwise wouldn't have gone through the system. So it's a real battle right now to see what can you get to the president and what kind of information should he have.
One more question before you go, and this is interesting. Your piece says the president orders a dozen Diet Cokes a day.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary in itself. But any other surprising details about the president's daily routines?
Well, that's like one of his vices. He doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink, he doesn't exercise, he doesn't eat particularly well, and Diet Coke is the thing that kind of keeps him, going. That's his adrenaline fix, his caffeine fix through the day, and he sort of sucks them down one after the other. He's an old-fashioned eater. He's like well-done steak slathered with gravy. Extra ice cream for dessert. He's not sort of bent to the modern day dietary advice of the nutritionists out there. And he doesn't sleep as much as a lot of people do. He probably sleeps maybe 5 hours a night, something like that. Television's on when he goes to sleep. Television's on when he gets up. It's an interesting habit of and pattern of life that probably is different than some of the other presidents we've seen.
So he's not a vegan. Okay,
not a vegan.
All right, Peter Baker. I got to say it one more time. For anybody who's interested in or fascinated by this president, this is required reading. It's a great article. Thank you for bringing it to us, Peter. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So firing back, we're actually going to hear from Roy Moore in the first time in weeks. We're going to have that part of an interview for you in just a few minutes. And also firing back, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand rips Republicans for their handling of sexual misconduct allegations within their party. She's got a pretty strong response from one of the GOP's most respected female senators. That's next.
Or Wall Street or the media or Capitol Hill.
Republican Senator Susan Collins defending her party amid new criticism this morning from Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. The senator slamming the Republican Party's handling of the allegations of sexual misconduct surrounding Congressman Blake Farenthold, Roy Moore, And President Trump himself, in fact, in one tweet, she writes, "We're in a moment of reckoning, and the silence from Republicans is deafening. It is long past time for them to join Democrats in holding members of their own party accountable." Joining me now, Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell of Michigan. Always good to see you. Thank you for joining me. First off, what do you make of where the Republican Party's handling of the sexual misconduct allegations is going so far? Do you think the Senator's attacks, Senator Gillibrand's attacks, are fair game?
Well, I think Senator Collins spoke for herself and Barbara Comstock and many of the Republican women. I don't think we should be making this into a partisan issue. I think it's reflective of the divisiveness that you see inside the Republican Party. There are a lot of Republicans that are horrified at what the situation is in Alabama and don't think that we should be electing a pedophile to the United States Senate. I don't think we can have a double standard. I don't think that this entire issue should be partisan in any way. A dam has broken. I'm not sure it's as real as a lot of people want to say it is, because I think we have to make it real for the tip waitress, the factory worker, the lawyer, the nurse, the teacher back home. But this has been decades of pent-up issues are just flooding out. And I think people are struggling with how to deal with it. But when you have this kind of candidate in Alabama, I know a lot of Republicans who are as disgusted as I am.
Yeah. All right. So given what you said there regarding Senator Gillibrand, she's been facing some pretty harsh criticism of her own from Democrats after taking on Senator Al Franken, and also having said that Bill Clinton should have resigned. So where do you stand on that?
Well, I've been really clear that I think a lot of these are gotcha questions. And, you know, Senator Gillibrand has been at the forefront of sexual assault in the military and other issues, and has had the courage to speak out on all of this. You know, there are a lot of consequences for women who speak up. And a lot of women, my generation, have too many stories to tell and look the other way, knew there were consequences, and haven't had the courage to come forward. She's been courageous. We can't have a double standard here. We can't have a double standard towards anybody. And the United States Congress has to be an example for the country. But I still think we got to figure out how we're going to make this real, because the way that some of the people who have been treated, who came forward in the last few weeks, is sure not making a lot of people that need their jobs feeling that it's going to be comfortable for them to say something.
Yeah, but in terms of the standards, I want to get your take on the implications of the senator's resignation, Senator Franken, of course. Does that set some sort of a new precedent when it comes to allegations of misconduct? Is due process no longer the standard when it comes to allegations that involve sitting members of Congress?
I think that due process matters, but when there's a pattern, and that's one of the things that, you know, people who are seasoned like me, and you've seen in a number of these cases, are a pattern of behavior and the drip drip. We do need to be at a higher standard in the Congress. And I know it upset a lot of people. The Republicans need to resign as well. A number of us have been very clear from the very beginning. We can't have a double standard. We do have to make sure that we do have due process. But when there is a pattern like the one that we have seen, we just can't. We know who we are, and we are going to be accountable, all of us, Republicans and Democrats, men and women, in 2018.
What about how Senator Franken handled the resignation announcement? One of his accusers had this to say about his remarks. Let's listen to that.
It was very defiant. He wanted to talk about the pain that he was going through, which is obvious, but not the pain that he's inflicted. So, and I thought that was inappropriate to do that from the Senate floor.
So did Al Franken's speech fall short?
You know, he apologized to the people, most of the victims. I don't have all of the facts. I think the day was very difficult for him. He gave up a job that he loved. I think he probably should have apologized again, but the man has lost his job, as he should have. And I'm just not going to do these gotcha questions, Alex, because we got to keep. What we're not doing is talking about how we're going to change the culture, and that's the discussion I want to see.
And I'm all for that too, because I'm right with you on that one. But I am curious from a financial standpoint, Congresswoman, do you know how much money has been put out there to settle allegations of sexual assault on both sides, just in general?
Well, that's one of the, you know, most of us in the United States Congress didn't even know that there was a fund. And as you have heard, there's one case that was public that had been settled from that. It was the Republican congressman from Texas, Congressman Farenthal.
I think it was $84,000, I think, in
it
that
was
regard?
$84,000. And I have been told, and they're trying to get the details, and these are secret agreements. I think there's agreement in both parties. We must become transparent, and we cannot use taxpayer money to settle any of these claims for despicable behavior. But how do you protect the victims? But I've been told that those 17 million we heard about several weeks ago are also covering asbestos cases, anthrax cases. So we need to get the facts. But how do you get at members who use their MRIs for settlements? Barbara Comstock today called for an outside counsel to potentially evaluate this and look at all of this. I think we do need to get the facts, though I have become more sensitized than I probably was in my initial how do we we are transparent and don't use taxpayer money. We do need to be very sensitive to the victims, the survivors. And, there are real consequences. I think that's what people don't understand, that for so long we've kept our mouths shut. We haven't said anything because you did pay a price. And many of these women would still pay a price. And so how do we handle that, protect them, protect those that we got to protect everybody in this process, which is how we've got to change the culture. We need to set the rules in the workplace and enforce them and make sure there is a due process for all, for both the victims and those that have had allegations made against them, that they are quick, that they are fair, and that they're proportional.
Well, my money's on you for changing the culture, that's for sure, after this conversation. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell of Michigan.
Thank you.
In just a moment, we're going to hear from Roy Moore granting his first interview in weeks.
Thank you.
After that, the Russia investigation and the GOP's concerted effort to discredit Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Where might that lead? Alex Wood here at MSNBC World Headquarters in New York at the half hour. Here's what we're monitoring for you. We have some breaking news to share out of Alabama. Embattled Senate candidate Roy Moore sitting down with local media and with just 2 days now until the special election, addressing the women who accused him of sexual misconduct when they were teenagers. We're going to bring back NBC's Vaughn Hilliard, who's in Birmingham, Alabama, for us. So, Vaughn, bring it to us. What is Roy Moore saying?
Okay, we're going to want to play you this soundbite here, Alex. He did about a 25-minute, what I'm not even going to call an interview. It's more of a conversation, right? It should be very clear that Roy Moore is not engaged in an interview with a media news outlet since dating back to these initial allegations came out on November 9th. He has not been seen publicly since dating back to last Tuesday. This is the weekend, right, before Election Day on Tuesday, and Roy Moore is nowhere to be seen. So what does he do? The only time we've seen him, he sits down with another friendly host that I think will just let him speak for himself. This is how he's responding now, a month after these initial allegations.
They know I've stood for moral values, and so they're attacking me in that area. I understand that. It's inconceivable to think that somebody would wait 40 years because they were embarrassed or ashamed of something, and then less than 30 days before the general election come out and make allegations and then appear on a political advertisement when they've waited 40 years not to be embarrassed. They put their pictures, my opposing opponent has put these pictures on political advertisements, and this is simply inconceivable. People don't do that. It's done for political purposes, and when this race is over on 12 December, it will be over.
We should note, Alex, that the women who have made these allegations multiple times have opened themselves up to further questioning, right? Roy Moore himself, though, hasn't been willing to sit down and answer questions, has avoided the press every step of the way, driving by them. The campaign has blocked him off. And just to give you a little bit of contrast, right, where you're hearing Roy Moore sit down with friendly hosts, you have Doug Jones, who we have had the chance to talk to multiple times. He's actually arriving here right now to a church in Birmingham, this third church here of the day. He was in Selma yesterday, Montgomery, Birmingham. This is an Alabama Democrat who has been out on the campaign trail as opposed to the Republican in this race that simply is not meeting with potential constituents, is not engaging in interviews, is essentially running a ghost campaign. We have made numerous attempts ever since I got here on November 9th to have that conversation with Roy Moore, an earnest conversation about these allegations, but also about the issues. He calls this a scheme, right? Essentially, he set this up as an us against the world campaign, and he has pushed aside these allegations as a scheme scheme by Republicans, the Washington establishment, the liberals, and it should be noted that he has a base here who believes him when he says this. We've gone around from every corner of the state over the last month, and I've talked to Republican voters who said that they believe Roy Moore. When I ask them, though, who is the they? Who is it that is behind this scheme, as Roy Moore propagates it to be? They don't have an answer, right? They say that they're getting paid. I said, who are they getting paid for by? And they don't know. The question is on Tuesday whether that will work, whether Roy Moore propagating this as a conspiracy will get him to the U.S. Senate. Alex?
All right. Well, great perspective there, and great getting that soundbite from Roy Moore in this lone interview of late. Thank you very much, Vaughn Hilliard, for that. Joining me now, Aaron McPike, Senior Advisor for Media Group of America, and Laura Bassett, Senior Political Reporter for the Huffington Post. All right, ladies, you heard it there, particularly the point that Roy Moore made, saying, why would these women wait 40 years for this? It's simply inconceivable. People just don't do that. I want to get both of your reaction to that. Laura, you first.
I think that you can't look at these women in a vacuum. We are in a very different moment in time now than we were 40 years ago. If you look at the women who started this all, the famous women who accused Harvey Weinstein of sexual assault, we're talking about famous, powerful women. Gwyneth Paltrow, Angelina Jolie said she'd known about it for decades, and they're only coming forward this year. And of course, they have no particular political motivation to come forward. And their accusations against Weinstein set off this avalanche of this Me Too moment, this reckoning, which is happening now. And so these Roy Moore accusers are now feeling emboldened 40 years later to come forward because so many other women are coming forward at the same time, not necessarily because he's now running for Senate and they have these political motivations to try to take him down. And so I think it's absolutely absurd for him to suggest that 40 years ago, when they were 14 years old or even 20 years old, that they were in the same kind of moment that they're in now.
Yeah. And in terms of political motivations, Aaron, I want to get you to speak about what you think Roy Moore said there in your opinion. But political motivations, it's my understanding that the majority of, if not all of Roy Moore's accusers are Republicans. So add that into your answer there.
Well, Lee Korfman, the biggest accuser of all in the Roy Moore story, who is 14, who came out in the first Washington Post story about this, said she's a Republican. She voted for Trump, in fact, so she was not politically motivated. I think the biggest point of all when it comes to Lee Korfman is that when she was interviewed by the Washington Post, she was interviewed 7 times before that first story came out, and they tried to convince her multiple times to go on the record, and she finally did. But that's because people don't really want to talk about these things. Many women are coming forward, but there are many more women who are not coming forward with their stories because it's still not fun to talk about. And she several times over the last 20 years wanted to talk about it. She wanted to confront Roy Moore about it. She has said that in numerous interviews since. It's just a hard thing to talk about, and she's struggled with it for years.
So do you think, Aaron, that Roy Moore's campaign feels more emboldened now, especially following the president's endorsement Friday night in Pensacola, putting it out on Twitter yesterday, the robocalls starting today?
If Roy Moore's campaign and Roy Moore truly felt emboldened 100%, it would have been Roy Moore who spoke to Chuck Todd on Friday. It would be Roy Moore barnstorming the state rather than Doug Jones. So I don't think Roy Moore feels as emboldened as we might think. They're trying to play the game here, run out the clock if they can run out the clock. He is obviously in the lead, but he seems to be in a little bit more hiding than you would normally find a candidate, a Senate candidate, in the last couple of days before Election Day.
You know, Laura, I know you heard his campaign manager this morning saying that he doesn't think there's going to be an ethics committee investigation if Moore gets elected. Is there any doubt the Senate will take some sort of action, Laura?
I really don't think they will. I mean, you heard what Orrin Hatch said about this, which is we let the people of Alabama decide. He said, I think it will settle a lot of questions if the people of Alabama elect Roy Moore, which is to say, basically, if you have enough votes, if you can win, then it expunges any kind of sexual misconduct accusations against you, which is an absolutely absurd position to take.
All right, guys.
Yeah, Alex, they will definitely seat Roy Moore. This has been a bit of a dance suggesting that maybe they wouldn't. They're absolutely going to seat Roy Moore, and it is going to be a circus once he actually gets to Capitol Hill. And reporters will talk to him about everything, and you'll have a number of Republican senators trying to run away from Roy Moore on every issue of the day. It'll just be a circus, but they're definitely going to seat him.
All right. I do want to get one more question in this regarding the Mueller investigation. I'll ask it of you, Laura. Let's take a listen to what the ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, said this morning.
We do know this. The Russians offered help. The campaign accepted help. The Russians gave help, and the president made full use of that help. And that is pretty damning, whether it is proof beyond a reasonable doubt of conspiracy or not.
Where does the Mueller investigation stand right now, Laura? And are there any congressional testimonies in the pipeline?
I think that he's just really getting started, and clearly he has a few more tricks up his sleeve. It's kind of unclear what direction he's going. There's lots of possible outcomes here. One is that Trump is taken down for conspiracy. Another is that they just can prove collusion, which is not in itself a crime. And I see even if they can prove that he colluded with the Russian government, Trump completely being let off the hook by Senate Republicans who are currently kind of just eroding the bounds of what of what people consider unbelievable these days. So I honestly don't believe that Trump is going to necessarily face any consequences unless they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed conspiracy.
All right. Laura Bassett, Aaron McPike, always good to see you both. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
Coming up next, what Nikki Haley said on a morning talk show about the women who've accused President Trump of touching or groping them without their consent. Conduct is renewing questions about the accusations aimed at President Trump. And in an interview this morning, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley opened the door even wider to taking another look at those accusations. She was asked, how do you think people should assess the accusers of the president?
Women who accuse anyone should be heard. They should be heard and they should be dealt with. And I think we heard from them prior to the election. And I think any woman who has felt violated or felt mistreated in any way, they have every right to speak up. I know that he was elected, but, you know, women should always feel comfortable coming forward, and we should all be willing to listen to them.
Let's bring in Carrie Sheffield, the founder of Bold, and Bill Press, host of the Bill Press Show on Free Speech TV and an opinion contributor for The Hill. With a welcome to you both. Carrie, to you first. Does Nikki Haley have a point?
Absolutely. This is a bipartisan, nonpartisan, post-partisan issue that women should have their voices heard. We also need to respect due process and make sure that women and men are both allowed to respond and counter-respond. So I'm glad that she said this to acknowledge that, you know, even the Oval Office, everywhere, no matter what office you're working in, women need to have their voices heard.
And to that end, in terms of due process, Bill, have the women who've accused President Trump of misconduct in any way, have they been given their due process?
No. In fact, they've been called liars. They've been called fabricators. They were threatened to be sued by Donald Trump, candidate Trump. They have not had their day in court. First of all, kudos to Nikki Haley for, I think, telling the truth and expressing things absolutely correctly. But, Alex, this is hugely significant because, as you know, one of the women against Donald Trump who accused Donald Trump of sexual assault has her case is still open. It's in front of the New York Supreme Court as we speak. The hearing was held last week. The judge is yet to rule. And the question is that the president's attorneys are saying that she should not have a day in court because he is president of the United States. What Nikki Haley, in effect, is saying is, yes, she should. And, in fact, the Supreme Court in Bill Clinton versus Paula Jones ruled that the attorneys for Paula Jones could depose Bill Clinton while he was president in the White House. I think this spells trouble for Donald Trump.
So if you look at that as a template for the open case right now in the New York Supreme Court, Carrie, comment on that. I mean, should this go forward, even though we're talking about the sitting president?
Sure. Well, Bill Press did say correctly that the Supreme Court did rule that no office is too high in the land to not have justice served. So I want to see justice served. I want to make sure that any case brought against any accuser does follow due process. So absolutely, I think that should proceed. And I think that Nikki Haley, again, I am very proud of her for making this statement. And my guess is she didn't make this statement without the White House knowing she was going to make it. She is very much a team player. So I think that the White House is all singing from the same songbook here. So, you know, I think let justice run its course.
I just have to say, Alex, I don't think the White House is saying that Donald Trump No. I have to disagree with Kerry on that. Nikki Haley is an independent person. I'm sure the White House line is, I've heard it from Sarah Huckabee Sanders. We've heard it from Don McGahn, the White House counsel. Their line is, he's the President of the United States. These women are liars. None of them deserve their day in court. He cannot be deposed because he's too busy. It would interfere with his duties. Well, that's what they argued in the court. That's what they argued in the court.
And to your point that you made, Kerry, I mean, John Dickerson's not going to give the questions in advance to Nikki Haley. How was she to know that he would ask that specific question and garner that response? So how could she have cleared it with the White House first?
No, well, the same thing happened after Charlottesville, where Nikki Haley said she spoke with the president, and so I would imagine, given this similarly sensitive situation, that she's spoken with the president on this. I don't think she mentioned that specifically, but again, you know, this issue is post-partisan, it's bipartisan. You're seeing people on the left and the right coming together. Gretchen Carlson, who is a friend of mine, I applaud her. She just introduced bills. She reintroduced her legislation flanked by women on the left and the right to say, you know, women should be heard.
All right, guys, I want to get to...
I just have to point out, Gretchen Carlson's not a member of Congress. She was there with members of Congress, Kirsten Gillibrand and Sherry Bustos from the House, who introduced that legislation. Just
okay. She was there with Elise Stefanik as well, who's a Republican.
I want to get into Roy Moore, though, because, Bill, Vice News conducted a focus group with supporters of Roy Moore. Here's how one of those supporters explained her support for him. Let's take a listen to that.
Mm-hmm. Roy Moore is not a miserable man. This man has more integrity than you can find in the entire Congress right now. Don't fall for the George Soros assassination plan. The truth will come out. These women are all going to be proven, just like the 16 that went against President Trump.
What's your reaction to that, Bill?
I think it's very sad to see these women put their ultimate faith in Roy Moore. And to call, as she is, that these 14, I think it was maybe 8 or 9, I've lost track with Roy Moore. And remember, these are children, these were teenagers, and to call all of them liars. I'm afraid that that woman's perspective, however, is going to win the day on Tuesday. I think it's be very sad to see Roy Moore come to the U.S. Senate. And I think it'll be a disaster once he gets there. I just hope the people of Alabama exercise better judgment, but I'm not hopeful.
And your reaction to the Vice News soundbite there, Kerry?
Well, I think that Roy Moore has a long career in his home state, that a lot of people feel like they understand him, that the fact that these accusers are coming up now versus multiple elections that he'd had before, that to them the timing seems suspect. Again, I've said before on your show that if it were me, I would be pushing the Republican Party to find a different candidate. But I do have to say that in terms of poor choices, I think the Democratic Party, by being so hard left on the issue of abortion, this has really come to haunt them. The fact that their candidate supports abortions, even late-term abortion, it becomes sort of a line in the sand for a lot of people to say, look, this whatever may or may not have happened beyond the statute of limitations with this guy, when it comes to protecting innocent life, for them, they're willing to hold their nose and say we need to stand for innocent life.
Alex, what she's very quickly, what she's saying is, I'd rather have a pedophile than a Democrat. I think that is a new low for the Republican Party in American politics. That's exactly what you're saying. That's exactly what you're saying.
I gotta get the last word. All right, thank you to you both. That's the last word. Coming up, we're going to talk to a reporter in Alabama who's been covering the Senate race, so stay with us. Moore would face the Ethics Committee if he ends up winning. Is there any doubt the Senate will take action?
I feel very confident that if that's what Mitch McConnell said that he's going to do, that is what he's going to do. There's been a real pushback on the part of Republican senators against Moore's candidacy. Just this morning, we saw Alabama Senator Richard Shelby coming out against Moore, which is a huge thing right before Tuesday's special election. I think there's a feeling that they do not want to be associated with a Republican who has these accusations of child molestation. They don't want the party associated with that. And I think also there's a feeling that he would be someone someone who would be very hard to control in the Senate. He wouldn't necessarily follow along with the party on party line votes, and he would make it really hard for them to get policy done.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I did have an elected official on my broadcast yesterday to whom I posed the question, hey, what would it be like if Roy Moore is walking the halls there up in the Capitol? And he said, well, I can't really speak to that, but I can tell you not a lot of people are going to want to sit with him in the Senate dining room, for one thing. So to your point, Asta, do you get a sense that Moore's campaign feels more emboldened now? Do they have the president to thank for that if they do?
There's certainly been a shift in the tide. I mean, initially, when these allegations came out, there was an idea that maybe some Republicans would run from him. There were poll numbers that were saying that the Democrat Doug Jones had taken some larger lead. We've now seen those things shift to a point where Moore is expected to win, or at least the race is too close to call. But certainly the presidential endorsement has given the Moore campaign a boost, because now you have the explicit backing of the most powerful Republican in the world, but also the RNC, that financial backing from them. And so we've seen the pendulum kind of get back to the point where initially it looked like Moore was certainly an outsider, an insurgent candidate among the Republican Party, but now he's again finding his way back into that kind of establishment circle, even if that puts him on the outs with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
So, Nancy, what do you think the best case scenario is for Republicans at this point if Moore gets elected? And is it a lose-lose, as some suggest?
Well, I think what will happen, the best case scenario for Republicans would be, if Moore gets elected, that he comes to Washington, he's embraced by the White House brokers some deal with Senate Republicans. You know, Trump has them to the Oval Office and tries to broker some deal, and that, I think, would be the best case scenario. You know, as much as Trump ran as an outsider, he really is the owner of the Republican Party, as Stead says, and I feel like if Moore comes, Trump is going to have to help smooth the waters there for Moore's entry into Washington.
Last note on this, I find it interesting that nobody seems to recall that the president actually endorsed Roy Moore's opponent in the, in the earlier races, Luther Strange. That's who he was for, not for Roy Moore. But anyway, there's support for him now, certainly. Let's go to sound from Newt Gingrich. It happened this morning. He was talking about Al Franken's resignation. Let's take a listen to that.
He's never had due process. He's never had an opportunity to clear his name. Suddenly, and then you saw it in the way you described it, suddenly all of the social pressure of the left wing of the Democratic Party came together, made it inappropriate for him to stay. Now, 1 million people had elected him, and 30 people decided he was inappropriate. Now, they haven't decided yet that Bob Menendez, by the way, who has a much more interesting story to tell, is inappropriate. This is purely and simply hysteria.
So, Asta, let's set aside the fact that it's coming from Newt Gingrich, who's certainly no fan of Al Franken's, but is there any legitimacy to what he said? Was there a rushed decision by Democrats to call on Franken to resign in the effort to serve a greater political purpose?
We certainly saw Democrats come to the point where they're calling on Senator Franken to resign, and there's multiple things going on there. One, there is a political advantage. They now can say, well, we have cleaned our party of Representative Connors, of Senator Franken. Now Republicans should do the same. They wanted that contrast. But if you talk to senators, if you talk to people who are calling for Al Franken, they're saying that this is a moral choice, that they were simply doing the right thing, and that was their logic for it. But let's be clear that these evangelicals and Newt Gingrich, Governor Mike Huckabee, those who have come to Roy Moore's defense, these are people who were calling for President Clinton to resign in the 1990s over allegations that he denied. These are people who have used these type of things to make partisan claims. And so although we have seen Newt Gingrich and others come to Roy Moore's defense, you have to take that with a grain of salt, considering that these are the same people who have called themselves the moral majority and asked for politicians to be held to a higher standard than even the regular people.
So then, Nancy, listening to this, is Gingrich saying that because Republicans need to set up a defense for Roy Moore and even President Trump?
I think Gingrich is really just trying to paint the left broadly as hysterical, and the idea that Al Franken resigned was something that had nothing to do with his constituents and that no one was bothered by that. I think he's really just trying to keep the focus on the left because, as Estelle said, right now the Democrats really have the moral authority over this sweeping sexual harassment story that we see affecting tons of sectors, not just politics, but also the media, business. And right now, you know, Representative Conyers of the House out of Michigan resigned because of allegations against him. Al Franken resigned. And we haven't seen the same calls for resignations on the Republican side like we have among the Democrats. And in fact, the president is also supporting Roy Moore. And so I feel like Democrats really feel like they have the upper hand in this, and the Republicans are trying to change the conversation.
I do want to actually change the conversation on one level here and talk about the GOP efforts to discredit Special Counsel Robert Mueller, including people who once praised him. Here's from the Wall Street Journal again. It's a quote I want to read. Some of the president's associates say they want the White House to set up a classic war room to respond to the probe, hire attorneys more inclined to challenge Mr. Mueller, or to spotlight what they see as an anti-Trump animus on the part of the special counsel. Aston, your thoughts on that? I mean, I did ask the same question of Congressman Garamendi, but what do you think is behind these efforts? And is it just happening now because the investigation is getting closer to the president's inner circle?
Since the beginning of the Trump presidency, we have seen the Russia scandal be the thing that really irks him deeply, something that he sees as a effort to delegitimize his presidency. And so as the probe continues to go, as the special counsel continues to get closer and closer to the president, we have reporting that says that the president is deeply irked, talking to allies talking to allies in a kind of fatalistic manner about this, and just really getting this being the thing that gets deeply under his skin. It does not surprise me then that the White House would be thinking about efforts to more directly combat the special counsel as his efforts have ramped up. But we should also note that these are the kind of anti-Robert Mueller tactics are one that has been going on in the conservative media for a long time now. We have seen for months different stories such as Uranium One or other efforts to discredit the special counsel, and we've even seen some hyper-conservative members of Congress call for him to resign on the House floor. So this is not just a President Trump anti-Mueller effort, but one that is reaching deeper into the Republican Party at large.
All right, Astrid Herndon, Nancy Cook, thank you both so much. Appreciate it. Coming up, why the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee says there's a pretty damning case the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. That is next. But first, Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update shows the difference between Al Franken and Roy Moore. Let's all take a look.
Senator Al Franken announced his resignation this week in the wake of sexual harassment allegations, and yet Uncle Bad Touch is up 4 points in Alabama. You see, the Democrats hold themselves.
We're monitoring for you. Happening right now, major evacuations overnight in Southern California after a new wildfire. This one broke out in Monrovia, and it comes as 6 other wildfires have destroyed almost 800 structures over nearly 300 square miles. 90,000 people have been evacuated, some returning to their homes to see what is left of them. California Governor Jerry Brown says climate change has made wildfires the new normal. New developments in the Russia investigation. The top Democrat on the House Intel Committee says he feels there is a relatively straightforward case for conspiracy. Here's Congressman Adam Schiff earlier today.
We do know this. The Russians offered help. The campaign accepted help. The Russians gave help, and the president made full use of that help. And that is pretty damning, whether it is proof beyond a reasonable doubt of conspiracy or not.
Joining me now, MSNBC legal contributor Katie Fang. Katie, big welcome to you. You heard Representative Schiff there. He says pretty damning. How do you interpret what you just heard?
Well, it sounds like Representative Adam Schiff has built a case, but you note what he said at the end, Alex, which is it beyond and to the exclusion, which is the legal standard of every reasonable doubt, because that is exactly what someone in the federal government would have to prove if they were going to present a case to a jury to prove that there was some type of conspiracy. But, you know, I want to note there is the word collusion. We've heard it. There's no crime of collusion. And so the important note is conspiracy. Conspiracy is a crime. You can aid, you can abet, you can conspire, and it's a web. It's a net. It's a collection of people that are involved to advance a goal. And was the goal ultimately to use Russian influence to basically determine the outcome of that presidential election? And we'll see based upon what Mueller's investigation reveals.
Very good point you make between collusion and conspiracy. All right, let's get to the report in the New York Times that says that White House Communications Director Hope Hicks may have been the target of a Russian intelligence operation during the transition. But then according to that article, there is no evidence that Ms. Hicks did anything improper. So what were they hoping to get by reaching out to Hope Hicks?
So we know the FBI actually did something what they called defensive briefings on 2 occasions right after they started to become involved in the investigation into whether or not there was some type of Russian influence into the presidential elections. And then they've now interviewed, Mueller, has now interviewed, or his team has interviewed Hope Hicks for 2 days in a row on Thursday and Friday of last week. So why is Hope Hicks so important, Alex? Well, it's not really what her individual criminal liability is, because there may not be any, as you just noted. She may not even have responded to those emails from what we know. It's really who said what, did what, where, why, and how. She has been called the gatekeeper to President Trump. She has been present during the entirety of these meetings, during the entirety of these transactions. She's seen things. Trump doesn't email. She emails. I mean, if you could find a central pivotal person who knows information that could actually refute sworn testimony that's been provided to the FBI or to the Mueller team so far, that's going to be Hope Hicks.
And so then how much does it complicate matters if Hope Hicks, after getting these defensive briefings by the FBI, if she were then to have mentioned it to the president? I mean, is that a dot that needs to be connected there?
Oh, that dot exists. She did not convey this information to the president from what we know, but you know who she did? She told White House counsel Donald McGahn that she had these FBI defensive briefings. So that's the important link. People that were central to the White House, including Hope Hicks herself, had direct information from the FBI as early as January of 2017 that something was going on. And if that is the case, it implicates anybody who's been tweeting, speaking, or representing things on behalf of the White House in terms of what they knew about the Russian involvement.
And then we know of at least 2 campaign aides, Donald Trump Jr., George Papadopoulos. They were offered Russian dirt on Hillary Clinton at one point or another. Does that rise to the level of accessories after the fact?
Well, absolutely, to the extent that we can prove that they actually meet the elements of that particular crime. But what's important about Donald Trump Jr. is we've now learned that now he's backpedaling about what he told the investigators before, the FBI before. When there was this conversation about that June 2016 Trump Tower meeting, he told Hope Hicks first. He didn't tell his dad. He didn't tell anyone else. He told Hope Hicks. So once again, all roads lead back to Hope Hicks, perhaps. She is going to be a huge factor and critical in this investigation.
Okay. Katie Fang, always love talking with you about things. You make things so perfectly clear. Thank you. Appreciate it. Coming up, Senator Kier, one of the first to call on fellow Democrat Senator Al Franken to resign with a series of 5 tweets condemning President Trump, Roy Moore, and GOP Congressman Blake Farenthold. And then in one of the tweets, she says, "We are in a moment of reckoning, and the silence from Republicans is deafening. It is long past time for them to join Democrats in holding members of their own party accountable." Let's bring in Republican strategist Susan Del Percio and MSNBC contributor Howard Dean, former Vermont governor and former DNC chairman. With a welcome to you both. Howard, I want to look at this new article out just this morning. It's in The Hill, and it's citing some Democrats. They're being critical of Gillibrand for her criticism of Franken and also former President Clinton. Could she be doubling down in reaction to that with these tweets, or do you think she just woke up today and decided, yeah, I'm going to pull a Donald Trump and just start tweeting?
I've actually had some extensive conversations about this with a lot of people because obviously I'm a very big fan of Bill Clinton. But I think she did the right thing and she had no choice. Kirsten Gillibrand made her mark as a significant senator by taking on the chairman of her own committee in the Armed Services Committee, Carl Levin, who, as a new senator, is unheard of, over the issue of sexual abuse and rape in the military. Kirsten is the one person who could not be silent about this. She said what she had to say. She did the right thing to be consistent with herself.
Okay, and I agree. She has been very consistent on it right from the get-go. Does it feel, Susan, to you like this is maybe a part two of some sort of a campaign? Democrats ousting Senator Franken on lesser charges, so now they have license to go after Roy Moore, Blake Farenthold, and even the big prize President Trump. I mean, you think that's part of what's driving this?
In part. I mean, there's no doubt that having basically forced Senator Franken to resign has given them temporarily a moral high ground, the Democrats on this issue. Certainly there are Republicans who have spoken against Roy Moore. I have. Senator Shelby even said he didn't vote for him. There's a lot of people out there, but let's not forget this is still going to be a long road for Democrats and Republicans. We're going to see where those $17 million worth of payments go. Most of them were given out under the leadership of Nancy Pelosi when she was minority leader and speaker. Paul Ryan wasn't in his position back then. So we're going to see a lot more fallout. Now, I do think it's an important conversation to have, but I think the governor was right. Senator Gillibrand did exactly what was good for her and consistent for her. There's no doubt in party politics, though, whether it's Democrats on their side have their problems and Republicans we have ours. But in this case, this also went to party leadership and the problems that it's going to cause within their own party.
Okay, so Howard, do you want to respond to that? I mean, what is Susan suggesting here? $17 million in payout under Nancy Pelosi.
Well, it wasn't just under Nancy Pelosi. When she was minority leader, presumably there was the House
majority.
Speaker
No, you're right. And majority leader, but she's the only one still in office, Governor. That's the only point I made, is that you have 10 years that these payouts were made while she herself, and going to the party politics. I'm not placing names solely on her, but she's the only one left standing who's still involved in the functioning of her party right now. That's all I was trying to say.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Look, I'm not trying to say that that the Democrats are blameless. Obviously, 3 of them or 2 of them are out of Congress, and maybe there'll be more when we find out who made these payments and what they did. But you could be guaranteed that in the 2018 congressional elections and the Senate elections, we're going to have a picture of Roy Moore and Donald Trump next to every single person on the Republican Party who's running for the United States Senate, whether they're an incumbent or not. And Roy Moore, look, Roy Moore is toxic. Roy Moore did some things that were way beyond the pale. I mean, there is a difference. You can't make the difference now because we're right in the heat of all this stuff coming out, and I think it's a good thing that's coming out. But there's a difference between what Al Franken was accused of and what Roy Moore's been accused of, and that has to do with minor children. So I think there are an awful lot of people in Alabama who don't want Roy Moore as senator. I have not given up on Doug Jones. I think Doug Jones has a decent shot, and depending on turnout, I think he can win on Tuesday.
Yeah, it's definitely all about turnout.
And I couldn't agree with the governor more about Roy Moore being absolutely toxic for the Republican Party. That is for certain.
You know, Howard, yesterday I spoke with Nora Marnstein. Of course, you know I'm resident scholar there at the American Enterprise Institute, also a longtime friend of Senator Al Franken's. And we spoke about his resignation announcement. Let's take a listen to what Norm had to say.
I trust him with my life. He is a remarkable human being, and I'm uneasy very much about the way this whole thing played out. If we can't go through a process, at least an ethics process, where you can hash these things out and begin to have a set of punishments that fit the nature of what's going on here, we're heading down a difficult path.
An ethics process I want to add that Al Franken called on and welcomed for himself. But do you, Howard, agree with him? Did Democrats go too far by forcing Senator Franken to resign?
No, here's what happens. This is really unfortunate because I also like Al Franken and respect him enormously. But here's what happens. This has been a crisis that has been bottled up for a very long time. This stuff has been going on college campuses, certainly in the United States House and Senate, among lobbyists for a very, very long time, before I was born. Finally now there's an explosion of the Me Too movement, which I think Time got it right in putting them on the cover. Mm-hmm. And what happens then is everybody, regardless of the nature of their sin, is swept away. It's unfortunate. It's not fair to Al Franken in some ways, but this is what happens when you bottle up a problem and nobody does anything about it, and it finally comes up, and then there's an explosion, and a lot of people are swept away. Some should be, some shouldn't be, some should have done less things than others, but everybody gets swept away, and that's what happened to Al.
You know, in terms of values, Susan, we've got the Senate election 2 days away now. The president's making a big pitch to voters for Roy Moore. I want to play a clip from his remarks at a rally on Friday night. Here's that.
We want people coming into our country who love our people, support our economy, and embrace our values. It's time to get our priorities straight. This guy's screaming, "We want Roy Moore." He's right.
Should the president be conflating Republican values with a vote for Roy Moore? And you heard it earlier from Roy Moore's campaign strategist. Is it fair to be saying that this is President Trump on trial in Alabama?
I don't think President Trump should be talking about morals or values for anyone, given his record, just to be simply put. Let's also not forget he's also now facing a 32% approval rating. Just recently, NBC put out a story that says that within 1 year, 5% less Republicans from last year to this year identify with the Republican Party. That's a huge swing. President Trump speaking up for Roy Moore is the only card that Roy Moore has that can help get people to the polls. So for that purpose, I guess I understand why the president's out there. Why the president can, taking away the horrible accusations of child molestation, this is a candidate in Roy Moore that has been removed from the bench twice, who believes in religious tests for Americans to serve their country in the U.S. Congress. This is a bigoted man who has his core values. I don't know who they represent, but they certainly don't represent American values, and I hate hearing the president say that.
Okay. Susan Del Percio and Howard Dean, good to see you both. As always, guys, thank you.
Thank you.
A New York Times article is getting a lot of attention. Its title, Inside Trump's Hour-by-Hour Battle for Self-Preservation. It has incredibly revealing details from inside the office, the Oval Office, of course. One of the co-authors is going to join me in our next hour. Announcement in today's demonstrations taking place outside the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, Lebanon. Joining me now, Mark Ginsburg, former Middle East commercial attorney, White House Middle East advisor, and U.S. ambassador to Morocco. Mark, it's always good to talk to you about these issues. I know you've seen the demonstrations. How is this good for the peace process?
It isn't good. It's one of the dumbest diplomatic moves that the United States could have made. Look, I just came back from Jerusalem a few weeks ago. I didn't see Israelis demonstrating in the streets saying this is absolutely essential for our livelihood and for the safety and security of Israel. I didn't see Israelis demanding this from the United States. This entire move was bought and paid for by the president's financial backers, who do not support the creation of a Palestinian state, who do not support giving the Palestinians any access to any legitimate potential capital in East Jerusalem. The people who support this, Alex, are the people who deny the validity of a two-state solution. It only undermines, of course, his son-in-law's efforts to try to forge a Middle East peace. So they can gussy this up all they want, but it really didn't achieve anything tangible other than appease his supporters.
I'm sensing you don't agree with Nikki Haley's call of it being a courageous move. It's courage. There are some who are saying it's folly.
No, it's not courageous. That's just an alibi. When you have our closest allies that Israel is trying to rebuild ties with in the Sunni Arab world, who are condemning this. The president travels to Saudi Arabia. His son-in-law travels to Saudi Arabia to try to forge a Middle East peace. And this only complicates it. What in God's name is the president thinking when he's trying to get his son-in-law to be able to achieve some breakthrough with Arab states, and every one of these Arab leaders say this is the stupidest, dumbest thing that the president could have done?
Well, is there a window in time, in which Jared Kushner could work and others assigned to the task of trying to, broker Middle East peace here? Because this can't happen any time before maybe 3-4 years, logistically speaking.
Well, sure, of course. I mean, I realize that it took 20 years for my embassy in Morocco, a new one, to be built. It'll be 3 to 4 years before you see anything, a flag flying over any embassy in Jerusalem, at least under current circumstances, the president has said. And yes, surely, of course, this may very well be just a distraction from the peace process. But, Alex, there's only so much Arab states can really do by throwing the Palestinians under the bus and saying this is not important. Okay, there's only so much the Arab street will put up with. Arab leaders need to be able to get from Israel some tangible evidence that they are prepared to come to some accommodation with the Palestinians. And what the president did was, at least for the time being, throw the peace process over the cliff.
Are there any U.S. allies, Mark, beyond Israel that are agreeing with this move? I mean, is the U.S. essentially doing this alone?
I can't think of any. I haven't seen any, other than the fact that this appeals to Prime Minister Netanyahu and to, of course, spiritually to all of us who care deeply about Jerusalem. It's a feel-good moment, but it doesn't, you know, you wake up the next morning, Alex, and you realize, what has it really done? And look at the turmoil and the travail that it's created for the very Arab states that Israel needs most now to be able to align itself with against Iran.
Well, we know in the immediate sense and aftermath, 4 days now straight of a rage as a result of this move. All right, Mark Ginsburg, it's always good to talk to you. Thanks, Mark.
Sure, Alex.
He watches up to 8 hours of TV a day, and he's the leader of the free world. That's stunning revelation and more from a fascinating look at President Trump's daily life. That's coming up next hour. Good day, everyone. I'm Alex Wood here in New York at MSNBC World Headquarters. It is 1 o'clock in the East. It's 10 a.m. out West, and here's what's happening right now. The Alabama Showdown Countdown. 2 days to go amid a deep divide and revealing numbers on voter enthusiasm. And there's new support from President Trump. He's about to unleash a last-minute robocall in the battle for Bama. On the Russia probe, the White House campaign to discredit Robert Mueller and the top Democrat investigator in the House.
We do know this. The Russians offered help. The campaign accepted help.
Plus Trump, Twitter, and TV. A riveting look inside the president's struggle for validation while watching up to 8 hours of cable news a day. But we begin with new details in the Alabama Senate race. With just 2 days before voters cast their ballots, the Roy Moore campaign shooting down efforts of a purported ethics investigation should he win the election on Tuesday.
Mitch McConnell and his crew have been threatening Judge Moore from the get-go. They spent $30 million down here trying to beat him in a primary. And then all this fake news from the Washington Post surfaces. Judge Moore's going to go to Washington. Judge Moore's going to win. And I highly doubt there's going to be a Senate investigation. But if there is, Judge Moore's going to be found telling the truth, just like he always has, and he will win.
Well, a new poll today showing Roy Moore with a 4-point lead. Let's go to NBC's Vaughn Hilliard. He's in Birmingham, Alabama, where Doug Jones is expected to arrive at any moment. It appears, Vaughn, that he is running about 15 minutes late or so to head to that church. But we've heard from Roy Moore's campaign chair there. We have not seen much of him. What has he been doing to snag votes as the clock winds down?
We're 48 hours away, Alex, right, from Election Day, and Roy Moore is nowhere to be seen this weekend. He hasn't been seen since he held a rally dating back to Tuesday night. Usually that weekend right before Election Day, you have an all-out effort. The candidate, much like Doug Jones, how about we just use Doug Jones as an example in this case, right? Doug Jones, this is his third Birmingham church that he is hitting here. He's about to attend alongside New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, but he was also in Selma yesterday. He was in Montgomery. He held a Get Out the Vote concert last night right here in Birmingham. He has multiple stops here planned today. So if somebody had told you, a month ago that the Democrat for the Alabama Senate race would be making an all-out effort here as opposed to the Republican who hasn't been seen, I think it would make you blink a couple times. When you're looking at the TV airwaves, right, Roy Moore is being outspent 5-1. When you look in mailboxes, people are getting flyers in their mail, not just from the Jones campaign, Alex, but also from super PACs. One particular, Highway 31, a super PAC that has put millions of dollars into this campaign. And one of those flyers is Ivanka Trump on it. It has Republican Senator Richard Shelby, the other senator here, as well as Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who all have given skeptical outlooks on a Roy Moore Senate candidacy. And so that's what people are waking up to here. I should note that President Trump has put out a robocall that is hitting homes here across the state. So really, Roy Moore, the biggest thing he's got going for him outside of just the how many more Republicans are in the state than anything, it's the fact that he has the president at this point making robocalls for him. But we don't expect to see him here on the ground until Monday, Alex.
How about voter turnout? What are election officials expecting?
The Secretary of State told me on Friday that he's expecting at least a 25% turnout now at this point, which is it's just significant for Alabama, right? Democrats, particularly black voters, haven't had much of a reason in terms of competitiveness to come out to the polls in past elections. You look at what we're looking at is the absentee ballot requests, right? This is really the indication that we can go off at this point. And county officials in multiple counties were telling me on Friday that they have received sixfold, up to ninefold the number of requests to a typical election, just because of the interest. One I think we should note are two counties particular, right? These are conservative counties, Madison County and Tuscaloosa County. Why are these counties significant, and why is the increased interest significant? Is because these were counties where, yes, they have Republican voters, but they were willing to vote against Roy Moore back in his 2012 Chief Justice race, right? Pre all of these allegations. So there is a constituency, Republicans in the state, that have shown a willingness to vote for a Democrat in the past. Whether they're able to do that again and vote for a Democrat to put somebody in the U.S. Senate, though, may be a different story. We should know, obviously, much more come Tuesday. Alex?
Okay, Vaughn Hilliard, thank you so much from Birmingham. Let's go now to NBC's Jeff Bennett. He's following the president from West Palm Beach, Florida. Jeff, with a good Sunday to you. We've got some new reaction this morning, certainly from the ranking member of the House Intel Committee on this ongoing effort to try to discredit the Mueller investigation. What all did Adam Schiff say?
Well, that's right. Congressman Adam Schiff, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, says he's troubled by an apparent effort to undercut Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. And he says he points to this effort in conservative media circles. They're seizing on a report that Mueller had to remove a top FBI agent for sending texts that were critical of President Trump. Now, this happened over the summer. We just learned of it about a week or two ago, Alex. And here's what Congressman Schiff said on one of the Sunday political shows this morning.
The intent here is nothing short of discrediting Mueller, then discrediting the Justice Department, then discrediting the FBI, then discrediting the judiciary, should the judiciary convict some of the people that Mueller has charged or may charge in the future. This is an effort to tear at the very idea that there is an objective truth.
Now, this all comes, of course, as Mueller's investigation inches higher up the Trump food chain, now implicating 4 former Trump campaign associates. But separately from this, Schiff says he sees clear evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, claims President Trump himself, of course, denies. And, of course, we could learn more about the status of the special counsel investigation later this week, because Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is set to testify before the House Judiciary Committee on Wednesday. Alex.
All right, Jeff Bennett, thank you so much from West Palm Beach, Florida. Appreciate that. Well, this new article in the New York Times is providing one of the most detailed looks yet at President Trump's life inside the White House. The article says the president tackles each day as an hour-by-hour battle for self-preservation that is fueled by a steady stream of cable news, Twitter, and a dozen Diet Cokes a day. All of this, according to interviews with more than 60 advisors, associates, friends, and members of Congress. Joining me now is one of the reporters for that story, Peter Baker.